Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are continuing to explore an important application of machine learning, battery lifetime prediction. In particularly, we're going to go through together model selection. We're going to discuss what models to build, where do we start, and also how do we evaluate machine learning models. Let's take a deep dive. So when we are talking about the battery lifetime prediction, we are really talking about, can we know when battery will degrade before it actually degrades? So often, we'll see like a battery degradation trajectory look like something just like what we show on the slide. We have the battery capacity changes as a function of time, or if we are cycling the batteries, we say as a function of cycle number. The green curve shows a pretty long-lasting battery, whereas the red line here shows that the battery is rather short-lived. And it quickly reaches this red dotted line, which is a threshold by when we say this battery should retire. So to fulfill our battery lifetime prediction goal, often we'll use the time series data of battery cycling as our input. But of course, we often do not just take the raw data as the input to our machine learning models. We'll develop features in the form of feature metrics, and we take that to be the input to our machine learning models, so we can most effectively predict the metrics of which is our target. So if we think about like the machine learning goals we have, so often we have our battery lifetime prediction with the goal of doing a diagnostics for our batteries. In other words, we want to know what is the current state of health of our batteries, and also we may be interested in knowing if we can match what we observe up to now, the battery behavior, with the underlying degradation mode. So it will help us to understand what's happening inside our batteries as it goes through its degradation pathways. So with that in mind, this means we can take the information up to now, often is in the form of time series data of battery cycling, the current, the voltage, the temperature, all this information to help us to estimate, for example, the current discharge capacity at this given point. So with that in mind, you can see it's there are a number of machine learning models which are currently being used by a lot of the researchers and also engineers in the field. If we are thinking about the prediction of the current state of health of the battery as our goal, it's a regression challenge. And often people would start from linear models as a benchmark. If linear regression would help us to make this prediction, and also train models are also very popular because it allows us to capture the nonlinear relationships between our input and output. When we have a lot of data, and also when the data is complicated, neural networks is another choice. It allows us to fit the complicated relation between our input and also the output, which is the prediction goals we have. So this is kind of an example of battery diagnostics, but also often we're interested in prognostics. So battery prognostics in this type of machine learning studies, we're interested in knowing what is the future state of health of our batteries based on what do we know at the current state. So there are many prediction targets we have. For example, we'll be interested in knowing what is the battery cycle life. In other words, the end of life point of a battery. So if we think about the curve, the ones shown here, when we are talking about the prediction of battery cycle life, we are interested in basically knowing what's this point. So we are interested in knowing what is the cycle number when it reaches this blue point. Of course, at the same time, we may also be interested in knowing what is the remaining useful lifetime. In other words, so this is where we currently are, and this is in the future, we think the battery will degrade. So we know how many cycles from this point up to the point it reached the end of life for our batteries. So we can predict the remaining useful lifetime. Of course, most of the batteries, as you see as example here, it doesn't degrade linearly. So there may be a knee point, like up to then, the battery is behaving quite healthily, but after the knee point, it undergoes a catastrophic degradation. So we want to know what that point is. So if you imagine this is our battery degradation curve, and there may be a specific point, say maybe it is near the current state, maybe it is further along the way, but the idea is like by identifying this knee point, like we would have a good understanding when like the battery starts to have an accelerated degradation. And of course, sometimes like our goal is actually to reconstruct the whole degradation trajectory of a battery. So instead of predicting a single number, our output of the machine learning model is actually the whole degradation trajectory curve. So you can see like then that would require a more complicated model to achieve that, but it's possible. When we have a lot of data, it will allow us to really understand like what is the overall trajectory a battery would go through throughout its lifetime. So now we have our prediction goals. Like we also need to consider like where do we get our input information. So when we are constructing our machine learning models, we can have our input information from the early aging information, like the cycling information up to the current state of health. We can also like use the usage history if like it is the battery cycling data is actually collected on the field, so it's actually the drive cycle information from a driver, so it's the battery usage history. We may even use the information from the battery manufacturing, so actually before the aging tests. And also, often people start to use like the diagnostic text information. So these are like a specific test designed to help us understand the current state of health of the batteries, and we can use the features from the diagnostic tests to help us to make our prediction. So we have like the linear model, tree-based model, and neural networks as the three popular regression model types for like a battery prognostics, just like when we were like interested in knowing the diagnostics problems. So, but there's one more like point I would like to share. So sometimes, indeed, we are interested in knowing like when the battery would fail, so in terms of the end of life metrics. But sometimes like not only want to know the cycle life, we also want to know the uncertainty around it. So maybe there's a range of the possible cycle life that a battery would possibly going to like end up with. So I want to know the uncertainty. So if this is the case, often you will find like probabilistic models, such as the Gaussian process regression, being very powerful because this will give us a predictive mean as well as the uncertainty estimates for our prediction. So like that's the fourth type of regression models, probabilistic models, which have been like increasingly popular among like the battery engineers. So let's take a look at an example. So imagine we have over 180 lithium-ion batteries, and like they are being like cycled across 62 different formation protocols. Formation is the last step of battery manufacturing, and it is the first time after a battery is assembled, we have the current and the voltage passing through it. So battery formation is very important because like we want to make sure the batteries going out of the battery manufacturing are at a high quality. So in this case, like we have all the batteries being aged in the same way, and they all went through the same standardized periodic diagnostic tests. But because we had different formation protocols, we have like a diverse battery cycle life. In other words, like the battery behave very differently in terms of its degradation trajectories. So let's think about like the formation protocols. We have 6 different formation parameters. So in a way, it's like a single formation protocol, like is set at a given temperature, and we would have like the charge current step 1, followed by like a charge current step 2. In between, there's like a cutoff voltage, So we call them transition voltage between the two current steps. And then we'll go through the verification cycles. And then we have a rest time. So we can change the variables across these 6 different formation parameters. And this is what leads to the different battery cycle life we would observe after years. So this example is taken from a research paper from the references on the slides for those of you if you want to look into more details about the battery formation tests and also the degradation studies from there. So imagine this is our data set, and we want to use the battery charging and discharging cycles to help us to predict the battery cycle life. What models do we use? So we know the variables here are the formation parameters, and we want to build a regression model which predicts the battery cycle life. With that in mind, the first thing to try is linear models. So we can have a linear regression model, and in this case, an example, I chose to use the diagnostic features, which are the features extracted from the periodic diagnostic tests throughout the early battery aging tests. And here, we see is each data point here is a test data from the data set, and it's 80 to 20 training and test split. So the linear models behave pretty well. In fact, if we see the mean absolute percentage error is about 11%. And in this case, the data points with the open circles are the training data set. And the ones with the solid points, they are the test data set. And we have the linear regression model. But at the same time, we were thinking, well, how about these nonlinear relationships between our input features and our target cycle life? So with that in mind, so here I also did a random forest regression model. And you can see we can improve our predictive model's accuracy by using a tree-based model. And now the error is below 10%. Another note is about the evaluation of our models. So one thing we should note is that each time when we are training our models, we have the training and test dataset split. But we want to make sure we conduct a cross-validation of our model. So in this case, here is an example where we have a 5-fold cross-validation. So what does it mean is that we change which sample are in the data, in the training data, and which sample are in the test data. And then the training and test data sets, we change them and we repeat 5 times. So here, each of the fold of the training and test is shown in a specific color. So you see it's on average, we have our error with around 11.8%. And we do have a standard deviation from the 5-fold cross-validation. Now you'll be thinking, okay, so we demonstrate we can build a tree-based model to predict the cycle life from our diagnostic features, from the data set we are using. What if we want to use a more complicated model? In particularly, for example, we can use neural network. So for the same data set, the same 5-fold cross-validation, we see the neural networks actually behave worse than the more simple random forest model. So in this case, it's an example where we have a limited data set. So we have a bit over 180 different battery samples, and it's not a big data set. So when we have neural networks models, sometimes some training and test data set split, it works really well. But also because we have the limited data set to start with, it's very easy to have the overfitting. So in that sense, you see 1/4 of the cross-validation, that is red points, it shows a really poor performance, showing our model is not very robust and generalizable. In this case, you can see both the error, the mean error, as well as the standard deviations are higher. So this is an example where we see like a random forest model in this case is pretty sufficient if we are satisfied with around like 10% of the error in terms of predicting our cycle life from like the diagnostic features in early cycling in this study. So with that in mind, so let's start to think a little bit about a broader context of how do we apply machine learning to like domain-specific applications, such as battery lifetime prediction. One thing definitely we should keep in mind is we should choose our models, whether it's regression model or classification models, which are most aligned with our prediction goal. And we should think about how do we match our model with the data size and the characteristics that is most appropriate for our like specific application. So in this case, we have a rather limited data set, and we are extracting features from time series data. We should also consider like the computational resources. As shown in this lecture, like when I put together the linear regression, the random forest, and neural networks models, neural networks definitely took longer to finish the training. And of course, like in this case, we see like sometimes the simple models, they can outperform the more complicated ones in terms of its predictive accuracy and the robustness. With that in mind, thank you very much for listening and see you next time.